Yeah, it's sunglasses, because it's the sunshine, the movie. Oh, heck with it. All right, so Sunshine. This is a Patreon-sponsored review because, yes, if you go to my Patreon, it is possible to commission to me to review things that I might not otherwise. Now, this is a film. It's a sci-fi film directed by Danny Boyle, written by Alex Garland, who had teamed previously on a number of things, including The Beach and 28 Days Later. And this it's kind of a forgotten Danny Boyle film in a way. I don't think people forget that it exists, but it's one of those ones that people who like it keep going, why aren't more people saying this is one of his best films? And then there's most other people going, it's okay. And up to this point, I had really been in the latter camp, because the sort of general consensus, from the people who aren't in absolute love with this movie, is that it kind of falls apart. Not completely, but a bit in the tail end, in the third act. And that was definitely the impression that I had when I saw it originally, which I missed into the theaters. I think I saw it the year after, so it's been about a decade since I've seen this. Maybe a little more. But, so let's start with some explanation of what Sunshine even is, because at this point it's a little bit of a cult movie, if people know it at all. So the premise is that the sun is dying. It has gotten weaker, and as a result, the human race, the Earth's going to become uninhabitable, and the human race is going to be wiped out. And the film follows the crew of the Icarus. Technically, the Icarus II, which is a ship that is headed to the sun with a payload of a very specially designed bomb, basically designed to restart the engine of the sun and get it burning more brightly again. There is actually some solid science behind the whole idea. It doesn't get into it too much. You can debate how hard or soft the science of this is, but it's certainly presented fairly... It's certainly presented to seem like hard science. It's presented very matter of fact. It's not a bunch of whiz bang kind of stuff. It's very methodical. It's a Danny Boyle film. Whenever Danny Boyle makes a film, I would actually say, especially if it's a premise that seems like it might be schlocky, he's gonna give it a little bit of a more thoughtful artistic spin, and he does here. So we have this crew that is headed for the sun for this, and obviously they run into problems, their situations, and then it's about halfway in. No, it's earlier than halfway in the movie that this initially comes up. They get a signal from Icarus I, which was thought to be lost. No one ever knew what happened to it. And that ship is still around, putting out some kind of signal, and they don't know what's going on. And they have to make the decision whether it is worth it to stop in for that, or if that is too risky. And then, of course, there's lots of things that go on from there. I am going to be getting into spoilers later, but let's just start broadly speaking. This is a great cast in this. This was, at the time this came out, I feel like Cillian Murphy was the biggest name at the time the movie came out. But it also has Chris Evans in it. It has Michelle Yeoh in it. Well, I guess Michelle Yeoh, depending on what country you're in, might have been a bigger name. But she's in it. Benedict Wong is in it. It's got Rose Byrne. Actually, the woman who played Chantho in the Doctor Who episode Utopia is the voice of the computer on the ship. It's a terrific cast from top to bottom. Really talented, compelling, charismatic. The camera really loves them. Actors all over this thing. And like I said, it has a fairly thoughtful, fairly methodical vibe to it. It is, for the most part, certainly for its first two-thirds, presented in a kind of like a fictionalized sort of Apollo 13 or, middle chunk of 2001 sort of vibe. It's doing things at a leisurely pace. Occasionally stuff will pick up and they'll have to deal with something right away. But where we're not turning this into an action film. We are letting the tension of the situation just kind of sit. And the gravity of it with it. And it's also got a claustrophobic feel. Because the movie it neither starts nor does it cut back to, as the movie goes along, Earth, to show you what it's like there. It is completely confined to the ship, which lends that greater sense of claustrophobia. And as it goes along, it does kind of shift. And where it heads in its third act, it doesn't work, but for me, and knowing what was coming this time, I was really focusing and really trying to see, okay, is there groundwork that I missed that makes this work? And I don't think there is. I don't think this last third of the movie works. And that is a significant problem. I'll get to specifics on that in a minute when I start talking spoilers. But the performances are all good. It looks really good. The sets are incredibly convincing. The science feels solid. There's a lot of great tension in the performances and in the relationships. Chris Evans kind of steals the show a bit at a few times because he is by far the most focused. He's the one saying, no, there is nothing that we do to jeopardize this mission, and we are all expendable. He's very much got that mindset. And there's a guy a character of Cyril, who is the ship's psychiatrist and like the mental, like trying to keep their sanity. And he's like a little bit of an odd guy, aren't you? And Michelle Yeoh keeping the oxygen garden, tending to the plants, and that she obviously has poured her heart and soul into keeping this stuff going. Everybody feels like a fully fleshed out character, and the performances are really good. And while I am about to launch into criticisms of the tail end of the movie, the very end, the final two scenes, effectively, of the resolution of the immediate situation that the film is dealing with, and then the sort of little epilogue scene that happens after that are really good, are really wonderful and really gorgeous, and a really wonderful note to take the film out on. But most of that third act still doesn't really work, which means I need to get into spoilers now. So, if you haven't already seen the movie, and I would recommend giving it a shot, even though if you haven't seen it before, if any of this sounded like it was up your alley. So again, keep in mind more of a hard sci-fi bend. And Alex Garland, who wrote it, I mentioned some of the other stuff he wrote that Danny Boyle directed, but he also wrote and directed Ex Machina and Annihilation. So that's him. That's who Alex Garland is, and that's who wrote this. So if his work and if stuff like that appeals to you and you haven't seen this movie before, go and give it a shot before you hear what I have to say about this ending, because you deserve to have the best shot at enjoying it. And here we go with spoilers. So it's been said that the tail end turns into a bit of a slasher film and that the tone doesn't fit. I'm actually going to disagree. I think the tonal shift doesn't completely fall down. Where it falls down is who they turn into the villain. That, I think, honestly, is the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because what we have at the tail end is we have a character introduced who basically has gone mad from isolation and just the weight of the situation that he was in. And he was the captain, character by the name of Pinbacker, played by Mark Strong, and he was the captain of the original Icarus, and he was the only survivor. The rest of the crew died. It's not entirely clear whether they killed themselves or if he killed them. It's a little bit up in the air, but he is dead set and determined to stop the Icarus II, to let the Earth die. And he has these sort of odd monologues, saying like, there will be a moment when there is only one man left in the universe, and then that moment will pass. Will I be that man? And he also has a line like, I've spent the last 7 years talking with God. And that's sort of where the division comes. And I did actually look into this. I don't usually look into behind the scenes stuff, but I was trying to figure out if there was something that I missed. And I feel like there's a split, because what Alex Garland wrote was something much more philosophically minded. He really wanted to get into very existential questions when having these characters deal with these things. And having a character talk about God was really, for him, the main heart of the script that he wrote. Whereas Danny Boyle made the decision to downplay the more philosophical elements and themes, have that serve as background, and focus much more on the more visceral stuff, on the more immediate things, the threats of, well, initially, tech going wrong or the fire breaking out, and then, Pinbacker. And that loss of the more philosophical elements, I think, is part of why this falls down. But honestly, I think the straw that breaks the camel's back is the fact that Pinbacker is a character who we don't know, who gets introduced more or less out of nowhere after they board the Icarus One, because we don't really have a proper build to him, and it makes even less sense if you take into account that it seems in a lot of ways like the film was building Cyril, the shrink, as headed down a similar mental path to the one Pinbacker was on. I don't think it would have taken too many tweaks to the script to remove Pinbacker and have Cyril be the one who snaps. And then we have a character who we know and who knows these other characters and these our established relationships, as opposed to psycho killer comes out of nowhere halfway through the film, which is what happens. Now, what's motivating Pinbacker and what is driving him and what has pushed him to the edge, that all works. It's just him specifically that doesn't. If you wanted to stretch credibility and, go for a slightly softer thing, you could have even made him the captain, somehow having survived but being horrifically burned from what he had to do to try and set the panels back in place. Again, that would be a stretch, and I wouldn't actually advocate for that, because that the science of the film is a bit harder than would allow for that. But I still think that would have worked better than introducing this guy who's just from nowhere. And also, I don't think Danny Boyle's decision to never have him appear clearly, and I don't mean hide him in shadows. I mean every time he's in shot, the camera kind of shakes and it's blurred out and the image is blown out, and there's a couple shots where it works, and there's others this just looks weird. And some of the decisions, most of the things that I'm center around this character. So again, I think it could have worked if it was just somebody else. But because it isn't, there's a disconnect, and it feels more jarring than it should have. And maybe it would have worked better if the more existential themes were still in the film. Maybe. I'm inclined to say that it still really needed to not just be this external character who came out of nowhere. Especially because these ideas of how being out, this long and with this kind of mission and with this high stakes just can break people. That stuff is underpinning a lot of what's going on. You see how, in some ways, it breaks, in a very self-destructive as opposed to outwardly destructive way, it breaks Benedict Wong when he makes a simple, understandable mistake. He had 1 billion calculations he had to do by hand to make a tiny adjustment, and he forgot one thing. And it almost cost the mission. And the weight of that broke him. The film does set up how crushing all of this can be. But you don't pay that off with a character who just comes out of nowhere. He just comes out of nowhere, this guy. And it just doesn't work. And it's a shame, because it's a really well-made movie. It's a really well-executed movie, but for this one detail. This one nugget doesn't sink the movie, but it does hold it back rather significantly. And it's a question, I think, of how much it bothers you. I've seen some people make the argument that it still kind of works, but I've never seen anyone make the argument that, it makes the movie, or it's a big part of the point, or it's their favorite element. I've seen people defend it, but only in a, look, it's not bad, it actually works way. Not in a, no, but it's so good way. Because it's not. It was not the right call. And not because of tone, just because of details. And like, I feel like one or two more passes at the script might have ironed this out. But as it stands, this is the movie we have. And what it ends up being is a movie that is really good for about 2/3. And then it becomes just pretty good for the home stretch. Until those last two scenes. The detonation of the bomb and the one shot, the one scene we get on Earth afterwards of this frozen ocean in the Sydney Opera House and the sun getting a little brighter. That's beautiful. That's a terrific ending. And it helps bring it back up just a tad, but yeah, no. Pinbacker doesn't work. So that's Sunshine. You seen it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's a bunch of stuff to do down there as well, because you can support me through Patreon, through PayPal, whatever you feel like doing. Helps me cover my bills. Plus, there's a bunch of other stuff down there as well. There's my socials and all that stuff. Check them out. Click things. There's the like. I appreciate that. Subscribe if you haven't. Share this. Or don't do any of it if you don't feel like it. I mean, I appreciate it. I'd encourage it, but I'm not going to tell you what to do, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.